really didn't understand very well until I started to do all the research. And you might say, well, why did you do that? Because it became apparent over 3 years. I kept coming to the same conclusion, and I kept pulling back from it, saying, no, it's too big. This cannot be happening at the rate it's happening. But it's actually true, and we now see the evidence arising. And that's that there has been, and there remains, a control of the Western world in particular. That goes way behind all of the government bodies that we've got. It goes behind the agencies they use, the WHO and the UN. It's behind all of that. And it's orchestrated COVID. COVID, we now know, most of the evidence is already there, except, of course, in Ireland, because mainstream media in Ireland is the North Korea of Europe. There is no journalism. It all died in Q1 2020. RT is a steaming joke. Right? And it's the same boring, nodding donkeys we have as columnists in all of the mainstream newspapers. The editors of those newspapers will not take any counter-narrative documentation from writers like myself. That all stopped dead around April 2020 when I got something into the Examiner, and that was the end of it. I was on the fatwa list from then on. That got me researching what was going on. And what's going on is quite remarkable because Ireland has probably the most under-informed people in Europe when it comes to what's happening. And we also have a particular cultural vulnerability to agnogenesis, which is manufactured ignorance. We displayed that in over 50 years after the Department of Education did a study which showed the amount of abuse that was going on among certain schools with vulnerable children. So lots of those children were raped, were beaten, and some were murdered over a period because we refused, that the state refused in the 1920s to deal with a document which had investigated it because of Irish exceptionalism. Think about that. 1961, Dr. Lenz in Germany came out and said there's a problem with children with deformities from this particular drug that people are taking, thalidomide. The Brits and the Germans pulled it from the market within weeks. Ireland pulled it off the market 4 years later. And it was 10 years by 1974 before RTE did a documentary on it. We haven't changed. So what I show in my talk is that when the Troika came in and we were too busy looking down on our shoes to see what was going on, Ireland became captive. We became captive to stakeholder capitalism, which is the ideology that Klaus Schwab, who retired yesterday as the head of the World Economic Forum, has been promulgating for so long. His mentor for 18 years was Peter Sutherland, Fine Gael mentor, government mentor and chairman of Goldman Sachs, and also led in his position as the High Commission for Refugees at the time, 2012. He led the whole idea of open borders in Europe. So if you now look at what happened, straight after that, 2013, the Irish civil servants were given the job of formulating the UN Strategic Development Goals. I didn't know any of this stuff, by the way. If you're saying, geez, I've never heard of that before, I'm not surprised. But it's everywhere. So there's 17 of them. You'll see the little circular thing, right? That's them, right? The Irish civil servants and some Kenyans were given that job in 2013 because stakeholder capitalism had come in at that stage. It's why the government in Ireland is surrounded by a swarm of NGOs, and the Irish people have no voice. Oh, we're given the odd bread and circuses election to give us some idea that the Dáil has the power in it. The Dáil has no power in it. It's been handed up to Europe. Europe have handed it up further. That's just the truth of it. We're no longer living in a representative democracy because the objective of stakeholder capitalism is to replace and supplant representative democracy, and they've done it with extraordinary success in Ireland. In 2012, Enda Kenny went to Davos in January 2012, and he told the bondholders and all the billionaires there, they went mad borrowing. They went mad borrowing. It's they are the problem. In other words, he was saying, we've got your back. The bondholders are not going to get punished. He then was on the front cover of Time magazine in October 2012, and 3 days later I was criticising him in the Wall Street Journal, which really pissed off the economic crowd in Ireland. Not because of what I actually said. I described Ireland as a Vichy government, captive on the outside to the bondholders, internally to the union godfathers who were setting their own pay and pensions and securing themselves, and also the banks that were leaning over the shoulders of the Department of Finance to create a bogus Insolvency Act, which continued the power with the banks. I said, this isn't a this isn't crony capitalism, this is a crony democracy we've got. And so we roll forward, 2015, the UN then adopted the Strategic Development Goals in the summit. That was all Irish handiwork. And where are we now? You know, we're in the top 10 implementing it in the world. Now, if you take the Strategic Development Goals, you go into any AI machine like Grok or anything like that, and you ask it, how many of these Strategic Development Goals cannot be fulfilled without open and lax borders in Europe? They'll tell you 7. 7. In other words, the UN Charter on Strategic Development Goals cannot happen unless we have lax and open borders in Europe. Cannot happen. Now, that's just the reality of it. So on the 26th of June last year, nearly a year ago, I was across the road in Boswell's Hotel doing interviews, and the Irish Parliament sat. All the independent TDs voted against us joining the EU Migration Pact, all of them, because they were taking their instructions from their constituents, but they weren't in the majority. And every single TD from the Uniparty and from the Greens voted to voluntarily join the EU Migration Pact. The Danes couldn't believe it, because they had an opt-out as well. But they weren't going to just voluntarily join it. But we voluntarily joined it. Why would we voluntarily give up control of our borders? God damn it, like, think it through. Why would we do that? Why would these people? Because they're under instructions from above. That's why. It's as plain as the nose in your face. Right, I'll put up the slide. 7 or 9 votes to voluntarily join the EU Compact Treaty Pact at the time. That was extraordinary. We actually gave up control of our borders to a bunch of bureaucrats in Brussels. Like, why would we do that? And every single independent TD in the Dáil voted against it because the people were saying no. The Danes were looking and horrified. Denmark was the only country in Europe that's actually correctly managed this migration problem. They're now only accepting around 5,000 citizens a year. They have it under control. And the Danes were not opting into the EU Migration Pact. They were the only other country, I think, along with Poland, that actually had the opt-out not to go into the Migration Pact. So why did the Republic of Ireland jump into something that it didn't need to do? And we're now being given a quota designed by other countries on how many people we're going to take in. We're being told that it'll be something like 15,000 refugees and asylum seekers, but they're preparing for 24,000. And then when you look at the numbers from 2020 to 2024, roughly around 520,000 people came into Ireland. Some of those were returning Irish, a lot of those had work permits, student permits and so on. But 36% of that number, which is 182,000, were in here on an unorthodox manner. And when you look at that number, that 182,000, 60% of that were Ukrainians who were here under, quite correctly, under EU Temporary Protection Directive. 75% of those are staying. They're not going back to the Ukraine. It would appear that's the mindset. But we'll see. But when you net it then down to the asylum seekers and refugees, it's 72,000 came in on the back of what was happening in the Ukraine, and they flooded into Ireland from around 2022 onwards. It's quite a substantial increase in refugees and asylum seekers, and we now know that somewhere between 50 and 80% of that number are economic migrants. They're not actually they're not actually real refugees and asylum seekers, and that's the issue. And we can all see it. You know, people are looking at it across the road, and I know that you have an issue here now in Athlone, along with many other centres around the country, where you have an IPAS centre coming in. And the only way, if you look at it, the political establishment, nearly all of them, the media establishment, nearly all of them, and if you look at COVID, the medical establishment, the scientific establishment, are all on the other side of the Irish people. So the only way you can actually deal with this is to come out onto the streets. It's the only way, and back in very large numbers. And if people don't do that, then Ireland will be radically changed in a very short period of time. I mean, if you look at France, for example, France, Sweden, the UK, Germany have, they've been doing this 3 years and they're now at severe problem. They're at a severe problem level. But in France, by 2050, 25% of the French population will be Islamic. And the Islamic community, to a large degree, do not assimilate or integrate into a culture. They want to stay separate, from the culture itself. They want Sharia law and all this kind of stuff. I mean, that's alien to our culture. Now, I'm making a complete distinction from Brazilians and Filipinos and all of those fantastic people who came in. We all know them. They're our friends in a lot of cases that have come into this country and integrated and assimilated. But you cannot assimilate Islam, especially violent Islam, and we can't tell the difference from one to the other. So that is a huge issue, and that's an issue that has to be addressed. But because of the switch now in the Overton window in the European elections last year, so the European public are now had enough of it, and it's quite clear that there's a movement back to the centre because there's been the growth of the parties on the right. It's happened in Germany, it's happened in France, Le Pen in France, AFD in Germany, it's happened in Italy, it's happened in Austria, it's happened in Holland, and Holland now are looking at opting out of the migration pact already. So it's quite clear. And now Starmer in Labour, terrified of Farage to his right, is now saying, "Oh, we're going to get tough on the whole thing." But I mean, they haven't been up till now, and of course, politicians will say one thing and do another. They're just buying time. So when you come to a local issue, I know you have other questions you want to ask me, but when you come to a local issue, what I would say to the people of Athlone, I challenge them. I challenge them directly. If you want to stop this, you've got to get the finger out of your arse and get out onto the street with the local people and let the politicians, though local and national, that the Athlone people bark. That they bark. And they can bite if they have to bite. But they'll start barking first. And there is an energy switch going on at the moment in Ireland. It's quite noticeable after the rally in Dublin on the 26th of April. And that energy shift is there. It's a question of finding the courage to step forward. And that means that men, especially, and women in communities have to step forward and say, well, I'm going to do something about this. Because this will not go away. This is a totalitarian agenda, effectively. And which I'll be talking about tonight. I'll explain all of that and how it's all interconnected. So with a totalitarian agenda, you can't back off it. You have to stand up against it. It's not like tyranny or authoritarianism, which kind of mellows if it gets what it wants. But totalitarians want total control. Total control. And you might say, well, why would they want to do that? Why would they want to flood countries? And the answer is to break down the bonds of society. You do that, then you can implement totalitarian control. And it's all there in open sight with the digital IDs coming in. Central bank digital currency, which is a conspiracy theory, is actually going to be live in Europe in September, October this year. And we're going to have vaccine passports. We're going to have carbon passports. Carbon limits. All of that. Every one of us, they'll try and sign us up to a kind of a digital prison. And that's the control grid that I'll be talking about tonight. So when you have this issue in Athlone, and I know it's an iPass centre, it's really quite a small part, but a very important part for the locals, of a much bigger tapestry. And you can't really fight it without understanding where it fits in the context of a much bigger omni-war. An omni-war is something that happens around you, but it's not a physical war, but it's actually happening. That answer all your questions?